Hi everybody! Today I am going to be showing how to make a little teapot bead. And just an FYI for this bead, I took a really long time on shaping the handle for this teapot since it's been quite a while since I've actually made one. So I have that part of the video sped up just so you don't have to watch this monotonous, really long handle shaping section. So just an FYI on that before we get started. But what I'm going to do first of all is I'm going to prep my petal stringer. And I'm using some enamels to give a little variance in color. And so I have a light lotus, I think it's called, which is kind of a purpley pink. And then I have light pink. And I'm going to be rolling a light pink rod in this enamel powder. And as you see, there's some green enamel there. That is beryl green. And I rolled already some pea green into that beryl green and pulled out those two stringers there to make the leaf stringer. And so I'm just mixing up some of this powder, and I tested this out and it was a little too light. So I'm going to make another stringer, and I'm adding a little more of the purpley pink color, the lotus color, and I'm going to mix that in, and I'm going to make a new stringer that's a little bit darker than the last one. And so this type of technique of actually using enamels, or you can also use frit, is what they use on what was called, and I'm not sure if they still call it this, but they were called watercolor beads. And usually they're beads that are totally covered in flowers. It might be all surfaces are covered in flowers, and it gives this varied different hues of the same color, like pinks or purples or blues or whatever. Putting the enamel on or the frit on gives a variance to your bead coloring that they call it a watercolor effect. So that's what this is here. That's what I'm doing here, but I'm only doing it for just the little flowers that are on the center of the teapot. But it's the same basic effect. And so I'm just heating up my pink rod, and I'm rolling it in this frit, and I'm getting all sides, even the top. And then I bang off the excess there and heat it up in the flame, and I have it a little further back in the flame so I don't boil it, at least at the beginning. If it doesn't boil on you, you can move it forward. And I'm going to pull out a stringer, and I'm going to twist this around as I'm pulling just to vary the color effects in it, to kind of give it a little striping, and it moves around that frit a little bit. And you could see the stringer is darker than the rod itself. So it did actually color it, even though it's kind of hard to see on this video that it's actually colored. But there's one pink stringer. And now I'm going to make a second one with some frit. And this is Wild Raspberry by Jeannie Cox. It's a really pretty dark pink frit, a mauvey pink frit. And I'm going to use the remainder of my pink rod, which I have puntied up to clear. So you can use every last bit of your color. And I'm going to roll that in the Jeannie Cox frit, just like I did the enamel powder. And an FYI, if you're going to be using enamels, especially if you use them often, it's probably a good idea to wear a respirator mask, because those enamels can get in the air and you don't want to be breathing them in. So you need really good ventilation, and you should probably still wear a ventilator mask. So just a safety precaution there. So I'm just pulling this one out, and I'm twisting also just to mix up that frit a little bit and give variance. And you could see the variance of that rod. And it's really hard to see the other rod in this video, but there is variance there. So I made a big mass of glass. I cut that part out so you wouldn't have to watch me just laying on all this glass, but I have a big ball of glass, and then I'm just flattening it slightly for the shape I want. Now you can make any shape. If you want a round teapot, you don't have to smash it. but I could have also made a really tall teapot that was like a vase kind of shape teapot. And in this case, I'm just making kind of an oblong teapot. And so these sides, even though they look flat now, these sides are going to round out a little bit when I heat them and melt in these flowers and leaf stringer. So I'm putting very tiny little dots that I'm dragging out into little points. But you can also pull them out. You could just put dots down if you want and pull them out into little leaf points. Afterward, I try to pull them at the same time, so I'm pushing down the dot and then pulling it outward to make a point. But I usually have to go back and solidify the points because they do kind of melt back in a little bit and round out at the tip. And so I usually do pull them out again afterward, like I'm doing right here. And so I already know where I want my flowers to be placed. And so I'm placing these leaves so that they would be sticking out from around the base of my flowers. So this isn't just general placement of leaves. So just an FYI, you might want to have your design already in mind, since I'm putting the leaves down first before putting down the flowers. And so the flowers will partially cover some of those leaves. And so now I'm going to place my flowers, and I'm putting 2 flowers on each side. One that has 5 petals, and the other one, it's a smaller flower that has 3 petals. So I have 2 flowers on each side. And so there's the first one of 5 petals, and I'm just pushing it down a little bit, solidifying it. And then I'm going to put the 3 petal flower right next to it. And it has its own leaves there. So I already had this design in mind before I put down those leaves, so I knew where to put them. And so this is the opposite side. So to have it look the same way on both sides, I'm actually putting the 5 petal flower on the bottom this time, and then the 3 petal flower above it. So either way you look at it, it'll look the same. So this is the 3 petal flower. And now I'm just going to help push these in a little bit and melt them in. And I don't melt them totally in, but they're really close. They're almost fully melted in. And I'm using my razor tool here because a couple of the petals wanted to meld together and form one ball. And so I'm just cutting into them and making sure they stay separated so that they look like separate petals when it's finished, when it's all melted and done. And so you can always redefine your petal edges by just cutting along with a razor and moving that glass out of the way so the petals stay separated. And so I'm just helping this along, and as you could see, the sides aren't as flat anymore. They're starting to round out because of the flower glass I've added, and also just because of the heat. It's rounding out the glass a little more. So now I'm just going to add little tiny dots of yellow. Except for that one, the stringer broke, so I got a big dot of yellow. So I'm going to pull some of that off because it was too much. I only want a small dot of yellow in the center of the flower and also in the 3 petal flower. And the same on the other side, just tiny little dots. Don't want too much. You just want a center point for your flower. And I'm redefining these petals again on this side, just to make sure they stay separated because they want to become just one big ball of glass instead of individual petals. And so now I'm just going to heat all this up. I turned my torch back up. I did have it turned down to do the fine stringer work. So just an FYI on that. When you want to work fine and small detail on your stringer work, turn down your torch if it seems like you don't have enough control. It's always better to work slowly than to work sloppily. So I'm just melting this in a little bit more, and they're almost fully melted in, just slightly raised. And it is rounding out. My teapot's rounding out. So this is going to be like an oblong teapot, but also with the slightly flattened look to it, it actually would lay against your chest a lot better than having a round one. You don't know which way it's going to point if it's round, but having it flat, it would lay sideways. So always one side would be sticking out when you're wearing it, and it's more comfortable that way. So now I'm going to place some spout glass. So figure out where you want your spout to be and how you want it to look, because you can also make spout shapes differently. And so I'm just starting with a dot or two of glass on the outside edge, and then I'm going to add some more and kind of pull it up and over a little bit, which I didn't get it too well there. And I really want it melded in so it looks like it's coming out smoothly from the teapot itself. So I was melting that in there. Keep your whole bead warm. And so I'm going to pull this, or try to, downward and then over a little bit. Until you get the shape that you like. And you can use a tool to help you along. I wanted the spout to be a little closer to the actual teapot itself. And take your time. See, I'm pulling it up a little more and then over. So that's kind of like the shape I wanted. And I want it pushed in even a little more. So I use my tool to help push it in a little bit more. And I'm trying to get out that crease that was there. And you also want to make sure, if you've seen me use the paddles there, you also want to make sure it's even with your teapot, that it doesn't go crooked, you know, lean to one side or another of your finished teapot. And so I flattened the end there and then poke a little hole with a razor blade. You can use any tool to poke the little hole. And so now I have my little spout. And now for my handle. This is the one I took a really long time to make this handle because I wanted it to look a certain way. And I just wasn't happy with it. And so I'm just feeding the glass around, and then I'm touching it to the top just to get the glass on there. And I believe here's where I sped up the video. And I want my handle to be fatter at the top and kind of taper down around to the bottom on an angle, you know, almost looking like a drop. And it just took me a long time to get this shape for some reason. I don't know why. But it has been probably years since I've made a teapot, so it's been a while. But you could just keep fooling with it. Just make sure you keep the rest of your bead warm as you're working the glass and fixing any problems or shapes as you go along. Just keep heating the rest of the bead every once in a while. And I'm kind of going off screen there. Sorry about that. See, I'm trying to get the handle to taper downward and keep that straight. So you don't want the handle to go crooked and flop off to one side or another. You want it to be centered with your teapot. Oh, and here's the sped up version. I guess it wasn't sped up before. I thought it was. But here, I just keep fooling and fooling and fooling, and I want it nice and smooth there to like merge right into the handle. Keep it level with the rest of your bead, and I want it to taper upward. And I almost have it. There it goes. I'm going up a little bit more. So it's however you want to shape your handle, though. You could just have a totally round handle. You could have one of those like big giant round handles that come out really far from the teapot. Those could have more of a tendency to break off, though. So it's just however you want to shape your handle. I just wanted the upward swoop to kind of even out with the upward swoop of the spout on the other side. So that's kind of what I was going for here. So I think I'm pretty much done, finally. But there is the finished teapot. And the only thing I wanted to add at the end, which I really should have, if I was going to do this, I should have done it before. And I have this sped up too because my hand is in the way most of the time. But I'm just taking a stripe of the same pink and I'm putting it around the top just to represent a lid, like a teapot lid. And if you hang this as a pendant on the top of the teapot, when you put it on your head pin, if you put a nice little pink ball bead or a crystal bead, that could be like the handle that you would lift the lid of the teapot off of. And so that can represent that. So this is just like a striping just to represent the lid of the teapot. And I should have put this on before I actually put on the handle and the spout. But I decided to add it afterwards. And I finally have my finished teapot bead. And there you have it. I hope you enjoyed watching.